2024 GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy joins me now. Vivek, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Good to be on with you, man.
So perhaps let's just start out. I mean, you're running for president in a fairly crowded field of candidates. Of course, former President Trump, Governor Ron DeSantis. You is something that Donald Trump had in 2016 that he no longer has, and that is no political experience. What separates you from the other candidates in this race?
I am the outsider in this race. And one of the things about me is I have lived the full American dream that allowed me to declare independence from the donor class in the Republican Party. I didn't take a tin can with a hat in hand asking a bunch of people for permission to run. I decided to run on my own convictions, invested, yes, my own hard-earned money to do it. And I'm also doing it not by criticizing other candidates. I'm not criticizing Trump or anybody else. I'm running for this country, not against anybody else. And that's, I think, what's propelled us from 0.0% where I began to now just 4 months into the race in an unequivocal third in the Republican primary. This is just the beginning.
And you mentioned former President Trump. Of course, some of the developing news that we are following right now in relation to the Washington grand jury that met today as it relates to Special Counsel Jack Smith and some of the efforts by the former president to block the transition of power in the 2020 campaign. I know you have spoken a little bit about this. I guess, do you condemn the actions of the former president that, was in the lead up to the inauguration of President Joe Biden?
I would have made very different judgments than he did, no doubt about that. But a bad judgment is not the same thing as an illegal behavior. And when we start conflating the two, I think that sets a dangerous precedent in this country for the party in power using police force to indict its political opponents and eliminate them from competition. That's not how we do things in the United States of America, and I stand on the side of principle. Even though, for me, now in third in the Republican primary, it would be much easier if a guy like Trump were eliminated from competition. That is not how I want to win. I want to win based on convincing the voters of this country exactly how we're going to lead this nation forward. That's how we do things in the United States of America, not by using police force to eliminate competition.
And you mentioned, obviously, where you currently stand. There was a Kaplan poll that showed you tied for second place with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Of course, former President Trump, though, he is in the lead right now. Obviously, it goes without saying that if you are going to win this race, you're going to need to take some of his supporters away to ultimately bring them to your campaign. How do you figure doing that, given right now it seems as if Trump is the unofficial leader of the Republican Party? I mean, it seems as if people who have spoken out against Donald Trump, like Liz Cheney as an example, they don't really seem to have a place in the Republican Party anymore because of what Donald Trump says in response to people when they come out against him.
So look, I think that Trump was an excellent president for this country. The fact that he won that 2016 election put a stop to what seemed like the inevitable march of the leftist neo-Marxists in this country. And I think that was a great feat. But I am the one who is able to take that agenda even further than Trump did because, for better or worse, he has an effect on people. About 30% of the United States becomes psychiatrically ill when he's in the White House. They start believing things they didn't otherwise believe. And I'm not having that effect on people, even though I embrace the same agenda. In fact, I'm going even further with the America First agenda than Trump did. And I think that will allow me to both achieve more with the America First movement, but also unite this country in the process. And that's why I'm in this race.
You mentioned some of your America First policies as you described them. You also talk a lot about wokeism, as do some of the other candidates. Ron DeSantis talks a lot about that as well. And you talk about it in a negative sense, as do a lot of the other GOP candidates. The left side of the political spectrum oftentimes is quick to respond to people such as yourself with saying, look, wokeism means being alert, being aware of things like racial discrimination, and that's also the official dictionary definition of the term. And I know people like to have this conversation about how Republicans, how people like yourself define the term. So how do you define it?
Well, wokeness is a worldview that says that your identity is based on your race, your gender, and your sexuality, that you're either an oppressor or you're oppressed based on those genetic attributes. I reject that vision. I think it's divisive, and I think it reduces the value of an individual to just the genetic attributes they inherit on the day they're born. I also think it's a form of psychological slavery that tells certain minorities that they're limited by what they can achieve in life based on those genetic attributes. That's un-American. But I also think it's important, as I just did, to be able to define what you're railing against. And that's why I like to be rigorous in the problems I'm analyzing. I don't just rail against them. I like to understand exactly what's going on. And that's why, I led the way a few years ago in writing the book that taught much of this country, including Republicans, what this problem was. But more importantly, I don't like obsessing over the problem. To me, it's a symptom of a deeper vacuum of purpose and meaning in our country. That's really what's going on. Young people, all of us, we're hungry for identity, for purpose. And I think what we really need to do is we need to fill that vacuum with the vision of what it actually means to be an American, a vision of American national identity that dilutes that woke agenda to irrelevance. That's how we win.
And I want to talk about some of the policies that you've also proposed here. One of them that's getting a lot of attention is your proposal to raise the voting age to 25 unless you do a couple or one of the following things, either complete a civics test or serve in the military. I want to ask you, many people are looking at this, and by many people I do kind of include myself in this, at a time when many young people are disengaged in the political system. They feel the system doesn't represent them adequately. Many people are looking at this and saying that would only contribute to that problem.
Yes, I respectfully have a different view on that. I think it's true. Young people haven't been voting at all. They're civically disengaged. But if you actually make the act of voting and civic participation mean something, if you actually know something about the country, that's going to increase engagement. That's what I want to see. I think every high school student in the United States should have to pass the same civics test that an immigrant has to pass in order to become a naturalized citizen. We require it of immigrants. I think there's no argument against an 18-year-old having to know the same things about the United States of America that an immigrant has to know about the United States of America to become a legal citizen. That will increase participation because young people don't value, none of us value a country we just passively inherit. We value a country we have a stake in creating, in knowing something about. And so I predict voting rates will skyrocket after we've actually required people to actually either know something about the country or else at least serve the country in some minimal way.
And so I guess I do understand your point there, but I mean, respectfully speaking, I've talked with many, people, elderly people, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, grown adults who in many cases are just as disengaged as young people. So how do you address that problem? You mentioned starting this at a high school level, but what about those voters who, already have the right to vote and perhaps make a blind decision as to who to vote for at the ballot box because they are misinformed?
So, Wyatt, it's a great question. And in many ways, I agree with you. I just think that we have to start somewhere, and that ship in the old generation has already sailed. You can't take something away once they already have it. But for starting with a blank slate, a clean slate of the next generation that ages into citizenship, we have to start somewhere. We can't use that as an excuse to abandon the project of civic knowledge and civic pride altogether. So the way I view it is, you're right. I do want a world in which everyone is actually an engaged, educated citizen who has a civic duty that they live out. The old generations, that ship has sailed, but we're going to start fresh with the future. And I think we're doing this for the future of the country. Certainly, that's why I'm in this for my kids and their generation. And I think we have to start somewhere. No time better than now to begin.
And just lastly here, before we conclude, I know we're tight on time, just to ask you about some of the other candidates in this race and how that might connect to COVID-19. That is something that obviously shaped the lives of many Americans. For many years, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is, many people would argue, one of your main competitors in this race, said recently that he would consider appointing Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is, of course, a Democrat. Many people have accused him of spreading misinformation and conspiracy theories on COVID-19 and on vaccinations. He has said that he would consider appointing him to lead either the FDA or the CDC, two of the most important health organizations within the entirety of the United States. What is your response to that, given that it is facing such public backlash, again, because of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s perspectives on some of these things that ultimately saved lives over the course of the pandemic?
So I think the CDC has outlived its purpose. That's one of the agencies I would actually shut down. When it comes to the FDA, I think someone like a Jay Bhattacharya or a Scott Atlas, that would actually be the right mold. Somebody who was willing to think outside the consensus, to reject a lot of that groupthink, but at the same time to have enough grounding in substance to be able to make decisions that we would expect of somebody who's running an agency like the FDA, which badly needs to be slimmed down. So I think that the intuition of thinning down the administrative state, yeah, anybody who says that, their heart's in the right place. I've been leading the way on it. But actually implementing that, I think I have the best vision of actually how to get it done. And that's why we're already rising and surging in the polls.
Thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, take care.